Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. For all of you John Grisham fans out there, I've got Michael Stockham, and he is an attorney. He's a and he's hailing from Dallas, Texas. What makes him interesting is that he is a writer and he's a storyteller, and I'm really happy to have him on. I've always been a John Grisham fan. I loved his books. The first book was Firm, and I'm really happy to have him on and share value to the audience. Michael, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's a blessing to be here.
Yeah, and quickly talk about because you're an attorney, but you also write books, and I'm really excited to delve into the questions.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll give you a quick thumbnail sketch. I've been a big firm lawyer for about 25 years. I specialize in large, complex litigations related mostly to securities. So advising boards on securities class actions, derivatives, transactions, etc. And then right around the COVID period of time, I reignited my love of writing. I've always pursued writing, even as a young kid to now. And so I had some extra time and decided to go ahead and publish a couple of novels and continue to work on that project today.
Interesting. And so one thing is going from what inspired you. You're a very accomplished rising star attorney, and what made you go into writing bestsellers?
Right. So some of that just relates back to prior life journey, if you will. So I am really what I call an accidental lawyer. I started off, my first degree is from the University of New Mexico in writing poetry.
Oh,
My
interesting.
master's degree is from Texas A&M University in writing short stories. And then I wandered in the desert for a while looking for a job. I was a mason's apprentice, a telemarketer. I sold medical equipment, was a dishwasher, and ultimately decided to go back to law school. So I attended Cornell Law School and then started my legal career in Dallas at a firm called Thompson and Knight, which has merged into Holland and Knight, which is about 2,000 lawyers, mostly in North America. And it just seemed like if I had the time to get back to a prior passion, that I should try to do that because it really does cycle back up as a calling every time. It's always a curiosity and always a desire.
Yeah, and I've always been fascinated with just people that have outside interest. And so you talk about how a convict changed a lawyer's life and literary career. What was that all about?
Yeah, sure. So that's my first novel, my debut novel called Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer. And it really covers two storylines at the same time that dovetail well together. It's inspired by true events, but not a memoir of sorts. The main legal aspect of that relates to a civil rights trial that I was appointed by a federal magistrate in around 2005 to represent a prisoner near Wichita Falls, Texas, who had made it past what they call summary judgments, meaning that there were enough fact issues that a jury needed to decide. And the logistics problem for him was that he was in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it was impossible for him to prepare for trial. So I was appointed and ended up doing my first chair federal trial as a young lawyer for a prisoner by the name of Edwin Kimbrell. The trial ultimately was one of the most pivotal things in my legal career. There's probably very few days in the year that I don't think about Edwin. It was really something to show up at a prison and expect to see somebody come out of solitary confinement and preconceived notions of what that type of prisoner would be. And then to be confronted with things like the humanity, the humor, the suffering of the medical condition, those kind of things. So it really was educational for me.
Interesting. And what did this ultimately inspire you to do? Because so you continue to tackle high stakes case, and you talk about just kind of corporate meltdown survival and crisis management. What's going on there?
Yeah. So I spend a lot of time working with boards of directors or companies that really have bet the company litigation or are under what I call multiple threat vectors. So maybe they have a lawsuit, they have a government subpoena, they have potentially a DOJ investigation, something going on, but multiple ways that the company is under threat. And so it's strategic crisis management, trying to prioritize what needs to be done first, how to deal with that the best, and then bring the company out on the other side. To tie it back to the prisoner case, that case taught me a lot about listening to people and not prejudging situations, and waiting for the facts to really come forward one at a time, and not shut down avenues of thought or strategy just because of what I believe may have occurred, but instead to really take the facts as they come, which develop over time in any litigation. It could be months or years until you really know the whole story. So you have to stay flexible, open, calm, and deal with each crisis as it comes on a daily basis, knowing that there's always tomorrow and something else to address.
And when multiple threats arise, what is your framework of prioritizing them? Because you talk about stock market crashes, government subpoenas, hostile shareholders. What's a company to do when the shit hits the fan?
So some of that's decided by the external factors, right? So say a company gets sued for securities class action, then a few months later gets tied in with a related company that goes into bankruptcy, that then becomes part of a Wall Street Journal article series, which then folds into government subpoenas, right? So some of the chronologies governed by outside factors. You don't go looking for trouble. I think one of my key talents, if you will, is gaming out what trouble could be around the corner and figure out how to prepare people that are already in crisis, already under stress,
Hmm.
how to prepare for the next possible dust up that could come around the corner.
Interesting. And a lot of these, because I pay attention sometimes, and it's like when these crises, especially these days, anything can, like, you go on the Twitter or something. So how do you manage messaging, what to say and when? A lot of companies, especially during COVID, they didn't know what to say, and they like kept quiet, and then people thought it was a conspiracy. How do you factor that in?
You really want to start prioritizing. It is hard to understand, right? And especially with social media, something can flare up pretty quickly and become a problem. I think a lot of companies, there's a fine tension between lawyers and PR folks, if you will. Most of your PR folks want to get out in the public and start managing the message and start putting the company's story out there, or the individual's story out there, to cut off some of this social media, some of the press, etc. Oftentimes, your lawyers are going to be more reserved because they understand that statements made now without full information can come back later in a lawsuit and really create a lot of trouble. So there's an inherent tension in that. I think the best thing to do is keep an open dialogue. You have to be able to talk to the multiple different professionals involved. I mean, I'm a lawyer, I'm a crisis manager, I'm one looking for the legal aspects and strategy, but I work very well with large PR firms and other groups. You want to hear everybody in the room and then try to get to a collective decision and a priority of messaging, one that is beneficial at the time so that it helps the company right in the immediate issue, but also beneficial in the future to cut off potential liability.
Interesting. A follow-up question I have for you is, I'm a big fan of documentaries, especially like investigative documentaries. And it's like when it's like when a Wall Street Journal piece breaks, or like, for example, Harvey, like something that sparks like something like the Me Too movement, or just these scandal like Epstein, these types of things. And like, you, not to say that what they did was right, but if you're on that end and the whole, all of a sudden, like the whole world is against you, how do you keep optimistic? Because I know a lot of people, these comments have affected them, and they've taken their lives, done a lot of drastic things. So how do you keep optimistic?
One of the key issues or ways to do that is to think about what's a today issue and what's a tomorrow issue. What can you actually control and make a difference on in the next 24 hours that you have control over? And then realize that other things are going to come out of the blue in the future that you'll have to deal with. It is hard to be optimistic. One of the talents that I think people need to covet is the ability to realize that the whole story isn't out yet, to suspend judgment. Maybe social media, maybe the news become immediately run to condemnation and judgment. If you're advising folks on the inside, you need to suspend that judgment until you have all the facts. So really it boils down to patience, chronology, and the skill of realizing what's important today.
Yeah. And I know a lot of like people just afraid to go out of their house and like these college admission scandals or like the Olympic, the gymnast scandal, all these things is like the people just like afraid to go out and like their homes are surrounded by reporters or like people just calling them, which kind of brings me to my next question is this kind of when you talk about how your one bestseller launched a series of legal thrillers and what are you ultimately you're a highly sought after litigator, you're an author as well. And when what is your goal in coming on the podcast? Is it to talk about your legal thrillers or talk about your expertise and talk about that?
A couple of things. We can talk about the series in a second. One of the main goals of getting on podcasts is to provide something, hopefully a kernel of help or wisdom to your listeners. So I've had a varied life. It's relatively circuitous. It wasn't a straight line. And there's some lessons I've learned that maybe others could benefit from. And one of those lessons is to not give up. The one novel, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, was successful. It was a bestseller. I think it won about a dozen different awards. So that led to what's the next project. And in that, I thought I'd like to do a series because it sounded like an excellent way to challenge myself as a writer.
Hmm.
And so I really have conceived of the Jake Fox series as 9 books, really broken out into 3 different trilogies so that I can explore a story arc for a little longer than just one book. So the story arcs will go for 3 books and then we'll change to another story arc. But I really wanted that challenge and the ability to develop characters that people could enjoy. And I think that happens in a series because people get to know your characters a little bit better.
Interesting. I just curious if because your path really resembles a lot of like John Grisham or Michael Crichton. I grew up really loving their works. You also talk about the hidden epidemic where prisons are elder care facilities and the impact on taxpayers. What is that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's going to be very difficult, we see it in all the debates now and in politics and otherwise about the sustainability of Social Security, the aging population, et cetera. The prison system, without a lot of thought put into it in the future, is going to really turn out to be the largest nursing home facility or facilities in the United States, with the thousands or millions of prisoners that are going to be above the age of 60 with the need for almost nursing home type care. And so the ability to get ahead of that concern and figure out a way, whether it's through compassionate release or figure out how to get resources into these facilities, et cetera. But it really is one of those things where when a society takes away somebody's liberty, we really, as a society, on board the responsibility to treat them humanely. And I think the aging of the population is going to make that question even more dynamic and difficult to deal with.
Interesting. And I recently read that a lot of the prison facilities, they are publicly traded companies and it's almost like a conflict of interest where the shareholders are they incentivized to keep these prisons occupied and I think there was a interesting book and article about that. I know we have around 3 or 4 minutes remaining, and one question I have for you is because you're a sought after litigator, and and I'm just curious. I just love to hear people's perspective. This kind of administration is like unlike any other, and sometimes watch the news like Pam Bondi and all of these. Do you think like the current like justice system, FBI is like reform is on a witch hunt against the current president's enemies, or is it due for reform? I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So I don't know that there's enough data out there to think about it as witch hunt or not witch hunt. I think what you've seen is an administration come on that is decided that it's going to be accelerated and aggressive in the law enforcement area. And so a lot of what in the media and a lot of what you covered in the news, whether you look at the right leaning news or the left leaning news, is this sort of thread of the breakneck pace of the administration, as well as a concerted and very public effort to back law enforcement and move towards more law enforcement activities. And we'll see how that plays out. It's going to be the midterms are 18 months away. So we'll see how the American public responds to a very different administration than what we had the past 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. If people wanted to connect with you, check out your works of fiction, connect and check out your profile, learn from you, how can they do that?
Absolutely. So if they want to connect with me professionally, it's at michael.stockham@hklaw.com. If they want to connect to me on writing or personally on novels, it's michael@michaelstockham.com. And they can check out all the books at jakefoxthrillers.com. That's the current webpage.
Awesome. Thanks so much for a great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. Always, it's a blessing to be invited on. It's been a joy.